Okay, well, back by popular demand, I am going to make a video talking about my mudskippers and my puffers. I get a lot of questions about these fish on Instagram and also on here on YouTube. So I thought I would make a video and kind of talk about these fish in particular and give a little bit more detail on a few of my tanks that I have here in my fish room. This is my brackish figure 8 puffer. This one is named Poe, and the reason why the name is Poe is it actually reads Poe on his back. So just a fun brackish puffer fish that I have, and he's a good tank mate to my African mudskippers. Now this paludarium that you see, it's a 75-gallon paludarium. I've made videos before on how I built this, and in here I have 4 African mudskippers and I have my figure 8 puffer. And this is brackish water. Brackish water is a mixture of salt water and fresh water. They are voracious eaters, them being the African mudskipper. So if you're new to mudskippers, they are a fish. They're part of the goby family. And I would say that if you're looking into getting mudskippers, then I would recommend getting the Indian mudskippers, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this video. The Africans are wonderful, but they are larger, much larger, a little bit more difficult to feed, and they do require a lot more space. They are really beautiful fish though. They have these amazing blue fins that they stick up when they're posturing. You can see there, it's kind of like a blue and gray and black finnage. And they basically do that. It's kind of like puffing out their chest. It's like a show of dominance or size or whatever, just to kind of like intimidate the other fish and keep them away. So they pretty much do it when they're fighting over food. So in here, there's a land area and water area. Even though these are fish, they do spend a lot of their time just kind of sitting outside of the tank. As long as their skin is wet, I'll just say skin, but their scales, as long as they're wet, they're fine. They can absorb oxygen through their skin as well as through their gills. So they've got a couple ways of getting oxygen. So really fun fish. Pretty much they spend a lot of time just kind of hanging out and basking. Not really basking, but they just kind of sit around. But when you do feed them, that's when you see all the activity that goes on with these guys. One of my friends, Jimmy, he calls them hippos because they kind of look like hippos when they're just kind of sitting there on the land portion. Because they are fish, they do go in the water. They don't swim like normal fish do. They kind of like just kind of swither, whatever, right down to the bottom. And you can see that they'll pretty much just kind of sit on the bottom of the tank, eating whatever food is in there, and then they'll just usually swim right back up and spend most of their time on the surface. So I'm not quite sure why they spend more time on the surface versus in the water. I'm not sure if it's because they can breathe more easily on land versus in the water, or they can see, they can see more and they can see predators and they can see food, etc. When they are on the surface of the water, maybe. But anyway, so pretty much the only time that they're down here is if they're needing to just, dunk in and get wet, or if they're, if they're looking for food, foraging for food. I put some bloodworms in, which is one of their favorite foods, so they'll kind of go crazy for those foods. But otherwise, they just kind of hang out and sit out for me to enjoy, watching them just kind of sit out and hanging out. Now this is my 40-gallon brackish tank that I have in my fish room. If you're not familiar with my fish room, I'll put a link up above and you can see some other videos. But this is a 40-gallon brackish tank that I built with a 3D background, and in here I have my green spotted puffer. This is also a brackish water system. Again, brackish water, mixture of salt and fresh water. Now here we can see that this green spotted puffer is eating bloodworms, and I'm just kind of dropping them from this little dropper thing. This fish will actually grab food from my hand. So like if I have a piece of shrimp or something, it will actually take food from my hand. But I just try not to do that and just usually feed just by dropping food in the tank. It does look quite fat, and this is something that puffers will do when they're eating, is they will just eat and eat and eat and kind of engorge their belly. It's not unhealthy. It's not anything that's abnormal. It's basically them just trying to eat as much food as possible when they have the opportunity. fish in the wild don't always have readily available sources of wonderful food like shrimp and krill and bloodworms and snails and things like that. So they will just kind of gorge themselves and fill their bellies when they have an opportunity. So I don't feed bloodworms every day. I give this fish a mixture of bloodworms, freeze-dried shrimp or krill, and snails. You can see a lot of snails there on the floor of the tank. Those are all dead snail shells. So these are all snails that became a meal for the puffer at one time or another. Now the snails are important for a few reasons. One, it's a good food source for them. It's important to have a balanced diet for your fish, but also it does help to kind of keep their beaks trimmed. So with pufferfish, for most pufferfish, they have a beak similar to like you would see on a turtle as an example, or a bird that has a hard beak. And what has to happen is they need to file that beak down. It's actually their teeth, but they need to file that down by eating, and they need to eat hard foods that will file those teeth down so that they don't continue to grow and become a problem. So in the wild, they're hunting harder foods, and they have to crunch through them with their big teeth or their beak, and that will naturally file their teeth down. And so in captivity, you need to make sure that from time to time you're also giving foods that are a little bit harder, so that it requires them to crunch through the food and file their teeth down. So here we're getting a nice close-up of this beautiful fish. I love the eyes on this fish, just the color of the eyes. Just an amazing fish, and they're not very large. This one's probably about 3 inches right now, so not a very large fish, and they don't get much larger than about 6 inches. So very doable in a tank like a 40 breeder if you are equipped. Now, they don't make great tank mates for lots of fish. They can be a little bit aggressive, so you do have to make sure that whatever you put in there is compatible with them. Also realizing that they shouldn't really be in fresh water. You do want to have some salt in their system. One of my favorite things to do with this fish is look at it from above, and because of where this tank is placed, and it's an open top tank, I get a chance to look down on it from above, and it just has this really brilliant kind of greenish metallic look to it almost. Sometimes it looks a little bit yellow, sometimes it looks a little bit green. It's almost like it's a metallic highlighter, and it just looks really, really beautiful. I love this color, and a fun fish. What will happen is when I walk into the fish room, the fish will come out and kind of swim up and down in front of the glass like a little puppy dog thinking about food. Now, I did want to add this footage here because I actually had my tripod and camera running when I was out of the room, because there are some fish in here that I hardly ever see. And if you look in that back right corner, you can see there's a fish on the bottom. That is a night goby. And I have 4 night gobies in this tank, but they hide a lot in the caves, in the background and in the rocks. And they're very shy. They come out more so in the evening time, and they don't come out much during the daytime unless they can smell food, primarily the bloodworms. So pretty much the only time that I see these fish is when I bait them out with some food, but I did want to just make sure that you guys got a chance to see them as well, as I hardly ever get to see them. I'll put a link up above of these fish as well, the night gobies. So in here I've got 4 night gobies, I've got my green spotted puffer, and I've got some mangroves, and you can see that I built that 3D background, and I've got some plants that are kind of living there on the wall. So overall, just a very enjoyable tank for me, and I'm looking forward to those mangroves growing a little bit larger as well, just to kind of add to the ambiance. Now we're moving on to probably one of my favorite tanks in my fish room and in my collection, and probably one of the favorite tanks that I've ever had in my lifetime. And this is my 40-gallon Indian mudskipper tank. Now, the Indian mudskippers, just like the African mudskippers, are a goby. They are in the goby family, so they are a fish, and they have very similar characteristics as far as their physical appearance and their their requirements as far as keeping them. The main differences are a lot smaller, and they're a little bit different coloration. So this is a fish that can easily be kept in like a 20-gallon long, as an example, or a 29-gallon paludarium or something. They don't need a huge amount of space. They are much, much smaller. And even though they can be a little bit feisty with one another, they're not as aggressive as the African African mudskippers. In this tank, I do have other gobies with them, so kind of keeping in the theme of having something along with the mudskippers, I have these bumblebee gobies. So they are part of the same family, but these are obviously just a fish versus having any adaptation to being on land. So these are also a brackish water fish, so this is also brackish water. Again, saltwater and freshwater mixture. I've got a couple of mangroves growing out of this tank. I've got a waterfall that I built that's being filtered by a canister filter. And what I love about the Indian mudskippers is their coloration and their fins. So like the Africans, when they kind of flare up, the Indians do the same thing with their brilliant finnage, but theirs is on the red side. So here we can see them kind of grazing on some bloodworms that I put in here, and they're just kind of fighting over the food and having some fun. But overall, I love this tank. I hope you loved it too. Make sure to like and subscribe to this channel if you have not done so already. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.